So, yeah, thanks for jumping back on, everybody. I'm going to paraphrase some of the questions that came along the way. I'm going to continue on with the same subject about your field sourcing you're talking about. I've heard the terms crew sourcing, which we want to do in our utility, and fleet sourcing. Vehicles that hit almost every street on a annual or more frequent basis. Meter reading trucks, although meter reading is getting automated. Crew sourcing, maintenance crews, and then back to the construction field inspectors. So if any of your firms looked into these possibilities of automating the data collection in those ways?
This is Matt Schellenberger at AEP. We have a group, we had a group here called the Charge Organization, which was a technology development group, and they've since been kind of morphed into a different organization, but they created a vehicle for doing exactly what we're talking about, just driving around and getting our resources using video and then stripping it down to the images that represent our structures. And so we had them drive a line that was rebuilt recently for an as-built survey to provide back to our GIS technicians, because they said in a lot of cases what they get back from the field today, whether it's red marks on a piece of paper or red marks on a print, right, a sketch, it really doesn't get them the info that they need to update the GIS appropriately. So we've started looking at that as an opportunity.
Yes, and Peter, I know that your company, you've got a combined image scanner device or a couple of iterations of it. Maybe you could go into that a little bit.
Yeah, no, great question. Thank you, Gavin. So a couple of things here. So there's the traditional route that we do, and that's where we have our own vehicles and fleets and scanners. Then we go out and we drive every road that we need to. Which is expensive, to do. But we do that en masse at the moment. We collect about 1.4 million kilometers of data currently. So that's a big operation, but that's not the future. The problem with that is you can map a lot, collect a lot of data, but that update frequency is really expensive, right? So there needs to be a better way of doing it. So really where we're moving to is the fleets collect. Can we install a piece of hardware which is relatively inexpensive, which can do this kind of job and constantly transmit information to us. So that's the fleet of sensors, or the network of sensors which we're launching next year. Now, the real issue though comes down to the fleet, and for a couple of reasons. Firstly, you've got to look at the efficiency of that fleet. How many times they're covering a road in a particular area. And you've got this trade-off between unique kilometers or unique miles you want to collect in a city versus the fact that probably when you're passively collecting, you need multiple passes of data, right? So you kind of need to work out what we call like the overdrive factor. You're unlikely with one pass to get all of the data that you want. Typically for us, our overdrive is somewhere around sort of 2.5, for most road segments. It could be even, higher than that on certain types of assets as well. And that information is kind of key to which fleets you would deploy on, which would make sense essentially for collecting as well. So there's a lot of preparation that we do before we go into a new city or state to try and work out those parameters as well. So but I believe it's the future, and certainly as sensors decrease in price, we can put more of them, that becomes less of of an issue as well.
I would just say we've talked with Peter at Voxel and others in the powerful combination of having that regular input onto the current as-built model, and if you can keep it in line with what construction is occurring in the field, it's a whole new world. So I second it. It's fantastic technology.
Okay, and then Dexter, I was thinking about your examples of picking the data up. I know that along transmission lines, you have teams, like you have security teams that drive them on a regular basis, or you've got people still doing the visual inspections for the vegetation encroachments. Are people talking about putting data capture devices on their vehicles or their backpacks or things like that?
I don't think outside of what's already been discussed, leveraging fleet vehicles. the only thing to be real short with your answer, Gavin, the only thing that jumps to mind is I did talk with some utilities that have previously leveraged executive transportation aircraft, helicopters, and retrofitting those with payloads to support exactly that use case, inspection use cases. But outside of that, I don't know of many people wearing some of the wearable tech in today's environment to support your application.
Okay, well, that make for additional tax write-off for those executive aircraft if they're actually picking up some data as well. And taking this, a little further in to the idea of the dark data. Brian, a real bugbear that Keith Bentley likes to talk about a lot is dark data. His interests are getting everything into the eye model, the eye twin, through the design and construction and as-built and then operations phases. So getting the dark data, when that trench is open, we talked about how hard it is to get the underground. GPR is still reading tea leaves often and doesn't work in heavy clay, et cetera, or very wet. When that trench is open, I wish the inspectors, instead of having the rolled plans open and doing red marks on them and hoping that gets interpreted by the drafters, is that they would have something like an app you were talking about there, Sky, that very easy, enticingly easy enough that they will document some of that while the trench is open. But Brian, any thoughts on how to capture dark data during the infrastructure life cycle?
Yeah, I guess we sort of see two different types of dark data. One is stuff that's digital already today, but just in systems that aren't accessible, and trying to hook them up so that they're all kind of aligned with the twin. So that's one way of making data that's already digitized, bringing light to that data. But then the other use case is the one that you're talking about, which is there's so much, especially of the construction and even the inspection effort that's happening on pen and paper. It's not even in a manual app, let alone AI on top of videos and things like that. And so trying to get all of that digitized and collected in a way that, and the key is, as Scott was pointing out, it has to be easy. It has to actually make the inspectors or the field person's job easier too, right? A lot of times we put applications out there where the collecting of the data is of great value to the folks back at the office, but it's not really helping the guy in the field do their job. And if it's not helping them do their job, it's not going to happen, right?
Yeah, and we've seen that too. We've done work with different utility companies and construction companies where we've tried supplying them with a drone in the back of the truck. So it's just yet another tool you pull out. And when the trench is open, it's so easy to just do one pass over the trench, 2D images and LiDAR data is collected very simply, and then that data that's valuable data. You know exactly where all of that infrastructure is, and then it gets buried. But yes, it's not quite simple enough yet, right? There's airspace issues. Even if the drone is going to fly 6 inches off the ground, it's now an aircraft regulated by the FAA, so that people have to be trained, they have to be licensed. There's some work that gets involved, and yeah, it's not helping them get their job done. It's not helping them get that trench closed up so they go home that day, right? So yeah, that's the rub.
We've also applied different techniques too, like for instance, to the point of where we're challenged with, in many cases we have to tie the new construction data with the old construction data. In some cases there's no as-built for the URD, the residential underground subdivision, for whatever reason, whether it was a purchase or whatever the case may be. And so what we've been able to do, if the data resolution is there from a sensor perspective with AMI, time series data, if we can do the load flow modeling to that point, we've been able to very accurately assign the associations of meter to transformer, and basically take physical assets locations. So like you can see the transformer, you can see such devices, but the performance of the secondary bus from a load flow modeling perspective, we can assign the consumers to those assets post, obviously without a a record, and then from there you can try and digitize that particular subset of the system. But again, it's not as easy if the trench is open. So
But to think of where we will be, 50 years from now, when this data when it becomes a natural occurring thing to digitize that type of data and keep it update, right? When you make changes, provided you're not shooting something under the ground and you can't track where it is, but when there's a trench, I like to think that my kids' will be like, I can't believe you guys didn't know where this stuff was. How did you ever get things done back in the dark ages, right? That's where we want to get the industry.
I think you're spot on. And Carson, your point about underground residential is extremely important, I think, because it is a large lack of data. And we're seeing a lot of even developers of new subdivisions who are now even proposing that they would own the installation of the utilities, but the utility still owns it. And that's why you're exactly right. And Kenneth, your point's spot on in that we need to make it so easy that it's almost not even a recognized part of the process. And if we can do that while collecting the data, we change the game. And I think you're spot on. In 50 years, I think it'll absolutely be there. I hope a lot sooner.
Yeah, and just specifically on the drone side of it, you have to remember we're kind of just coming out of the barnstorming era right now, right? People get drones and they kind of do what they want. It's kind of stabilizing. I work with the FAA. We're definitely moving along the path where it's going to be much easier to fly these drones. They're becoming more automated. The regulations are starting to open up, so we're going to start to see changes in the next couple of years that are going to make this much easier.
How much appetite do you think there is out there for the EDR, sort of the Google Glass or the Microsoft HoloLens type applications? We played around with that technology and it looked kind of interesting. And certainly, if there was a way that we could make that seamless to the operators, so to the people in the field, so it didn't feel like something weird, but it actually felt helpful for them, and at the same time could use cameras that are mounted on the glasses to collect that information as opposed to flying drones. I'm just wondering whether you think that that's an avenue worth pursuing, or do you think that that's too Star Wars at this stage?
No, we have actually a decent sized HoloLens group in the company. We were doing Google Glass, that kind of died off. I can't say too much of who we're doing this. Again, we're not here to sell product, right? We're a consulting company. We're here to make things get done for our clients. And we're seeing quite a few clients who are interested in, basically AR, VR in control rooms and things like that to get, and that's the technology of the choice for today.
Right.
Not drone based at all. But again, it's the drone group, but we take data, everything from satellites to body cameras and HoloLenses. We don't care.
yeah,
We're pretty interested in it, Brian.
Sorry.
Yeah.
On that end, obviously the Google Glass side didn't really go anywhere. We're definitely monitoring Apple. We've heard some news around maybe glasses coming out from them. There's some issues there as far as on the consumer side, I think more so the privacy matters that go into it. But if we could get it built into a utility workflow, I think you're definitely onto something, and it really would become very easy. So we're definitely looking at them, be it a helmet, body mount, or the glasses. I think would make a lot of things, and maybe even more real-time interaction.
Mm-hmm.
We see that both with the lenses and with the drones indoors, especially like doing warehouse inventory. A lot of pushback with, hey, there's a drone. You'd think the pushback would be, hey, there's a drone with these spinning blades of death that are going to kill me. And no, what it really is, there's a camera. I'm going to be seen on the camera. And so, what are you going to do?
Brothers watching.
Yeah, exactly.
That's one point about LiDAR, that there's less privacy concerns because you're not actually identifying somebody, or unless it's very highly detailed, not reading their license plate or something. Although, yeah, when the discussions happen to this in different municipalities, like in public town halls, people are still very nervous about the LiDAR because they go, well, that's a laser. What is it going to do to me?
What is it going to do to me, right? Or if it's infrared, and then people see it and they're like, oh my God, I'm naked, right? Because that's what happens when you pointed out a human, right? So there's issues. But what we do though is like the case of the 2D image capture when we're doing warehouse inspection, we use AI ML to identify people and just blur them out, right? We try to catch that in flight, right? So that it's never an issue. Their image never went on disk. And that kind of quells a lot of concerns.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, that's really the way to do it. So this is one of the big issues that initially we came across when we're collecting data now in 26 countries, and that privacy part. So we use the same approach. It's an AI ML approach that then removes, it doesn't just blur them out, it actually physically removes them from the data set entirely. And that's one of the things you can do when you have obviously the data from the LiDAR and the imagery converted into voxels. You've got that kind of flexibility to really do it. Obviously with 2D images, it's harder. You have to blur it out. That's what makes sense. But yeah, that pipeline, that's exists. It's necessary, and yeah, it's very common. We find particular, if we're walking, outdoors, sometimes with the backpack units on as well, it can be confrontational with the general public who don't like this kind of thing as well. And so we've got to be mindful of those issues as we kind of scale up collection.
It's similar also with the drones, right? Because when I say drones in particular, quadcopter, hexcopter, you'll have a team out in the field flying a drone around, and people will see a drone in the sky, and they'll either confront the people trying to operate the drone, or they'll contact the authorities. And so we have a whole procedure of extra people out there to intercept, the average population, to stop them from getting into the inspection area. And certainly when it comes to the authorities, we always call ahead before we operate so that they're aware of what's going on. But then, yeah, if you're challenged by a true authority, we have a policy of if they want that drone down, the drone goes down, and it adds more time on. But it's all because it's still new. But the newer technology, we're kind of, I don't want to say we're transitioning, because the quadcopters are going to be around for a while, but we're doing a lot of work with larger drones, smaller aircraft, if you will, right? So we do satellite, we do manned aircraft and drone, but now we're moving more into these fixed wing, high wing, smaller aircraft, like a little bit smaller than a Cessna, where we're now putting those cameras in there and we're flying power lines. And, we're all ready for the regulations to change so that we can do these long distance flights. And that's a little nicer, right? Because if you're an insurance company, you want to go to your client site and do an inspection of their roof, and they're like, well, what do I get out of this? You're just gonna charge me more, right? Because you know exactly what you're covering. You take off from an airport, effectively, a drone airport, and fly over the client side or fly over your power lines, and nobody notices. Once you're up 1,000 feet and there's no people on the ground, people don't even pay attention.
Yeah, people don't realize that their city is being flown constantly by small private aerial firms, and the only telltale sign is there's a hole in the bottom of that Cessna 172 where the camera or the LiDAR was. So yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to switch gears just a little bit, hit another subject. So we heard quite a few mentions of how the recognition of the importance of updating the grid, and it's translating into infrastructure spending, like the bills. Yeah, Peter, your company has like a white paper that breaks down the infrastructure bill. I was looking for a link to that to put it up in the chat box. But also the other things I've been seeing is that investment in AEC tech, in infrastructure tech, has increased in the past 5 years by a lot. We, lagged far behind proportionally to manufacturing, of course, have been well ahead in the automation. But Barbara, you've got your ear to the ground, or have had your ear to the ground here in this space for the geospatial industry for quite a while. What areas of focus do you think that the geospatial industry has had with supporting this infrastructure boom, so to speak?
Geez, given I don't know, honestly. Let me just start out that way. Because I'm coming back from 10 years in Geneva, Switzerland, and so this whole infrastructure bill has just come up in the conversations that I've had just since I've been back, and those are going to be with agencies like NASA, NOAA, and the U.S. Geological Survey. So it's agencies that are collecting a lot of Earth observation information, and they're all in for increases. To an agency, they're all in. Okay, so that's one thing. I think that's maybe a good sign that the federal agencies are in on this collect side. I think they're going to be under pressure, and this is where the industry could step up, is that they've got to do a better job of integrating that information. So just like cities are kind of silos out there, the federal agencies are still siloed out there. And so during these last, kind of the last part of the presentation, cities have put in like drill once, regulations. So before you dig, you got to call this number, and they're trying to at least kind of coordinate when you go in to dig. You could think you could use a model for collect once. Now, and that may sound kind of harsh for the industry because we've got a lot of collections, but I think there's just so much need for current information. I don't think there would actually be all that much of a negative impact back on the industry if it could in fact be better coordinated and put into a framework along those lines. So I think we're going to be under pressure, kind of coming full circle to your question, Gavin. I think we're going to be under pressure to in fact put an integrated framework together at multiple scales, whether it's a local scale, the state scale, national, regional, whatever, global, ultimately global. You see, Europe is already coming in with a call for a global digital twin, a digital twin of the earth. Okay. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to do that. So, and then let me, as long as I got the floor, let me just say two other things if I can, you can indulge me for that. Jim Gray, former head of research, at Microsoft, no longer with us, but, I had an opportunity to hear him talk, and he said, we often make this more complicated than we need to. It's ones and zeros. It's ones and zeros that we kind of deal with. And yet we assign LIDAR and hyperspectral and this movement and that movement. And when they get into a machine, it's ones and zeros. And as I was listening to Peter's talk again from Voxels, I think our historic view, even though we live in a 3D world, I think our historic representation of everything for centuries has been in 2D. And we are so used to looking at the representation in 2D, it's getting in the way of us making the transition to actually view the world. This is what Craig said in his presentation. Our brain has an amazing ability to translate all this information and integrate all this information, and yet we can't somehow get it into our computer systems yet. And yet it's ones and zeros. I'll go back to Jim Gray. It's ones and zeros. So for me, I think a big challenge for the industry, because I think that's where the real innovation is going to occur, is to help this transition. And then just lastly, I sure hope it's not 50 years, Sky, because if it is, I won't be here. And it would be nice to be here. So if we could move it into the 20 or 30 year time frame or less, that would be wonderful. I'll stop there, Gavin. Thanks.
Thank you. That's you echo the feelings of Vinny on that one. Yeah. Hey, I got a question from the audience. It's very kind of specific, but a question from Kevin is he missed Brian's presentation. And this one's drilling down to specifics, but with the acquisition of SPIDA, SPIDA, is there a digital twin component to incorporate into iModel? Maybe you could explain what SPIDA is, Brian.
Sure. So we've Bentley's been acquiring sort of a number of companies over the years. One of the ones that we did kind of middle of last year was a structural analysis. But in fact, I think someone asked a question around pole load analysis, and that's kind of exactly what SPIDA does. Is it's a design tool that you use to take a look at the load on distribution poles to make sure you're not overloading them when you're putting equipment on them. And so, yes, with all of our tools, they are all feeding the digital twin. So regardless of whether it's a desktop design tool, it's an analysis tool, we have a number of sort of operations and maintenance type tools. all of those tools, our integration strategy, our post-acquisition strategy is always the very first thing is to get them contributing to our digital twin, which is our cloud-based twin view of the world. We figure we can't very well go talking about making dark data available if we can't even make a data available from our acquisitions. So that's definitely one of the first things that we focus on.
Cool. Yeah. Well, what I'm finding out about utilities especially is that where there's an aspect of operations or anything like that, there are tools out there, but they don't have the big sandbox of the digital twin necessarily to play in yet.
Right.
And the challenge is building it. So I'm really happy that what we had so much discussion today about how to build and update the digital twins, the nuts and bolts of putting it together, the data collection, and the big data analysis. So we're going to wrap up this session. To follow is a it's kind of a lounge experience where you go in and you physically move your avatar over to talk to somebody, and it's voice distance activated. But if you want to talk directly with any of the presenters here or anybody involved, go into that. Anne is going to jump on here in a moment and explain how you log into that. So for closing remarks is, well, you covered everything I had hoped that you would cover and more. And speaking of more, we want to hear feedback from the presenters and the audience on what we could do next. I know there's a lot of interest in focusing on the underground a bit. I know that GeoGeomatics, that has the GeoIgnite every year, did a Canadian underground forum, which probably will become a North American underground forum, which exceeded our expectations of participation. The underground is the final frontier, I think, when it comes to this digital twin model of our infrastructure. On that note, yeah, if you also, I write for GeoGeomatics, and we really want to focus a lot on the infrastructure side of things. So any of the audience or presenters that want to suggest something that we could do a feature or article on, I love researching those and writing them. So thanks again to everybody who presented here and for the panel. And Anne's going to talk about the lounge